A young Napoleonic officer, separated from his unit, comes across a strange young woman with a connection to a reclusive baron and his castle, where he becomes determined to understand the mystery surrounding them. In the 1963 Roger Corman film, The Terror. That's the movie we've dug up this week on Movie Bones.
You know, after watching The Raven and after watching The Terror, I am left perplexed by movies that I have watched in the past couple weeks. Because I'm not so certain that these aren't just absolute genius level works, or if this is just thrown at the wall to see what sticks.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because after the last one, The Raven, I actually did a little digging into the making of The Terror, the one we watched this time. But before we get into that, let me just give a quick synopsis, if I can even parse this out, because this is difficult. So, if you watch the film alongside us or not, Jack Nicholson plays Lieutenant André Duvalier. He's a quote-unquote French soldier, kind of in the same way that, Kevin Costner was a son of an English nobleman in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, kind of a way. And somehow he ends up passed out on a cliffside beach near a German baron's castle overlooking the waves. One of those famous German cliffside beachfronts where you've seen all the travel brochures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, he encounters Helene. She's a strange woman who's also sometimes a hawk or a raven or some other kind of bird. It's a little unclear on that point, too. And after being treated for exhaustion by an old hag and her servant who are squatting on the baron's land, he sets about trying to figure out the mysteries surrounding these characters, because he's just kind of, I guess he likes the bird lady-ish kind of thing, or he's just really weirdly curious, but in a very awkward and unmotivated way at the same time. And that's the best I could come up with. And there's a reason for all that, like I said, but let's get into the superficial thoughts of the film, because I didn't watch it with the knowledge I got later from the Wikipedia page. So where do you start with this?
This is something that I was thinking about last night. Like, while I was watching the movie, one thing that I kept thinking about off and on, because in our review of The Raven, we did talk a little bit about that Jack Nicholson voice that we kind of know and love.
Yes.
And you actually see shades of that in this story right here.
Yes, you do.
What's so funny about that is this is Jack Nicholson, who has this very, I wouldn't say Midwestern. Where would you actually put his? Where would you put his voice at? Like, what part of America?
I don't know if I've actually heard him and heard that kind of accent, but it sounds a little more East Coast.
Yeah,
I guess is my best guess.
But you know what accent he doesn't have?
A French accent?
He doesn't have a French accent.
No, and he doesn't.
I'm not even saying that it should have been an overblown French accent, very caricature. But there is nothing about this character who's French other than the clothes he's wearing. And I don't even know if you call those French clothes.
He's kind of got that Bonaparte hat, the French military hat from the Napoleonic era. And that's like, yeah, he's wearing the outfit, but he ain't wearing the time period or the place, that's for sure.
and that's the thing. This movie does not need an historical setting. You know what I mean?
Not really, no.
So it's like, why does he need to be French?
Well, I mean, I will say that they do set up an atmosphere of its own. It's just one that kind of lacks any specific place because they put the French and the German in there all at once and these weird settings.
It's just so, like I said, I don't know if it's a work of art, like a true genius work of art, or if it's just, let's throw something against the wall and just see what sticks.
Well,
and make the story from there.
Yeah, because, I mean, because it's not just the lack of accents or anything, folks. There are problems. And if you saw this with us, you're probably scratching your head too. It's like, where are the character motivations? You don't know why he's so really invested in figuring out this thing with Helene. He seems to kind of like her, in a very kind of sheep-herdy way. But then that kind of gets subsumed by him trying to figure out all this other stuff. And none of the spooky stuff that happens seems to actually creep him out in a way that ordinary people would, he still seems to insist, even by the late stages of the film, that it's just psychological. Her problems are just psychological, Helene's.
Yeah.
When it's clear to anyone else watching, it's like, dude, have you been watching this? Are you actually here now? Because this is not natural, dude. I mean, I don't know how much of this. Yeah,
I'm going to go ahead and give this spoiler away.
Okay.
For those of you that watch. Yes, it's just all psychological. Every single character, folks. I cannot stress enough. Every single character in this movie tells him multiple times she's dead.
Yeah, it's like, nah, she's fine. She just needs a good psychologist and work this stuff out. And I'm sure all this other stuff will make sense then. All right.
Y'all aren't going to believe, good people. Y'all aren't going to believe when he finally figures it out.
Oh, you're talking about the twist, yes?
Yeah, well, no. When he finally figures out that she's actually dead.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that twist. Oh, I want to talk about that twist.
That deserves a whole paragraph on its own, really, folks. The twist is one that's one of those, it catches you off guard, not because it's so well crafted, but because it makes no sense whatsoever.
No, just say it.
None. I'll say it. It's like, okay, the twist is that the Baron von what's his name, played by Karloff, the woman has been cursed to torment him, who is supposed to be his dead wife, involving a tryst. He supposedly murdered her, but it's actually not the Baron. You see, there's a twist in that the old crone who cursed this woman in the first place to get revenge is actually her son, who she thinks is dead and who she thinks the Baron killed. Guess
what?
It's Boris Karloff, the old hag, and Boris Karloff, the one who's supposed to be her son. Now at this point, we're supposed to take this.
Yeah. And on top of all of that, when they throw this twist out there, because it's very like throwaway line. Like if you're not paying attention, you would not know that this twist happened. He turns out to be the guy that he thought, or that we all thought he killed. In fact, he killed him. And then, but somehow, we don't know how, but somehow he believes that he is the Baron and has all of the Baron's memories.
Yes, down to enough that it could fool other people, you know.
So he's not the person who he is, but he is also the person that he is.
Yes. And on top of that, his butler servant guy, Boris Karloff, servant guy, is supposedly, he was the one who was supposedly responsible for killing, helping him perform the killings. This is going to the original story that it was the Baron who killed his wife and her lover, and that his servant guy helped in those murders. Well, that doesn't line up either, because that means he knows. The butler dude must know. But the butler dude is also the one telling him this ridiculous story that the Baron is actually the old crone's son. It's like it pops my brain. I laughed out loud when it was revealed. It's like, how in the world,
I want to make this very clear. I did not think that was going to happen, but there was one point that I was sitting there watching the movie, and I did think, it was a fleeting thought. So I'm not going to say I knew it. It was not a concrete thought. But there was one point, like early on, when they started talking about like the actual mystery. I was sitting there thinking, it'd be kind of funny. Like, it was just a fleeting thought of like, it'd be kind of funny if he was that guy.
I mean, the guy who the plot twist.
Like, yeah, like who he wound up being. I think it was such a fleeting thought that I didn't hold on to it, but I was just like, it'd be kind of funny.
And I have to say it again. It's like, was he conceived while his mother was still in utero? Yeah, because that's the only way you end up with that. It's like
have you ever heard those like Chuck Norris jokes?
Oh yes, definitely.
Like Chuck Norris was born before his dad, kind of things.
He's so awesome. He was born before his dad.
Yeah, this is what it is. Boris Karloff, who's the true son of this witch hag, who he's acting like is.
I don't even think he would have passed as her son, even if he was younger Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff has always kind of looked like he's older in his movies. Even if you go back to the 30s even.
And they don't even, like, after that, do those two characters even speak to one another?
No, they don't. They just kind of, like, because she's struck by lightning because of reasons.
Yeah. I can't go in there.
Because she's a witch, and it's a holy place, and she'll be struck with lightning, which she was. And 2 seconds after she says it, she is. there's so many scenes where characters don't line up with each other. I had to look into this more. I had to look into the Wikipedia page. And I'm going to try and list to you guys a brief bit of information, as briefly as I can, okay? Corman basically shot this film kind of as a challenge to himself. He was really enamored of Edgar Allan Poe, and had actually done, as you know, last week, he had done a bunch of interpretations of Poe's work. But he wanted to come up with something that was Poe-esque, that was original of his own. And he was going to do it by using the rest of the set from The Raven. He had like 2 days to shoot as much as he could impromptu, just kind of apropos of nothing. He asked a friend of his, a friend of his, to come up with, just write a bunch of scenes involving castles and Karloff. And that's it. And he said, well, what's the story? He says, there is no story. Just write me some scenes. And that's what they did. And they came to the set the last couple of days. I mean, they actually postponed. I think he must have been like giving excuses to the people who were, because Hollywood sets are supposed to be taken down at the end of the film, right? They're struck. That's what they call striking the set at the end of a film. Karloff even said later on, it's like, it was the most funny thing because here he is giving these lines for not even knowing the context of what's coming next or what came before. And on the other side of the camera, they had to shoot in such a way that behind the camera, they're tearing down the set at the same time he's doing his scenes, in front of the camera. And he said it was the weirdest situation. Some of the stuff they did was he just went around the castle to get a bunch of creeping shots of, Jack Nicholson like exploring the castle. But all that blandness, it's like, oh, I understand there was no story. There's no character yet. He's just telling him to basically read these lines, if there's lines in the scene, or just look mysterious and go around corners. And this film actually had 5 directors officially, okay? Because after the first couple of those last 2 days of shooting, before they were actually finished striking the set for The Raven, they still had to do all these other exterior shots and then kind of do fill-ins to try and piece together some kind of a story. And let's see, I think the very last director wasn't even the last one on the title. It actually ended up being Jack Nicholson himself on the last day, because the day before filming, the director they had was called away. So then Jack Nicholson, the last day, actually ended up being, the guy directing the last day.
And it needs to be known, the director who is uncredited for this movie.
Yes.
Francis Ford Coppola, folks.
Yes.
The Godfather.
Yes. He got just like from last week, it's like, yeah, he was one of those guys who got to start with Corman. But even because of the mess ups they involved in this film, it's like he couldn't stick around long enough. He actually had deals with other studios to do things, so he couldn't finish himself. So there's like 3 other directors besides him came in to try and do it. And they all, because there was no official storyline to go with, they all just kind of did their own thing. They all had the basic concept, but they all had a different interpretation of it. And that's how, at the end of the day, Corman is left with all this footage from 5 different directors, including himself, and they don't line up. And he has to make them make sense. And that's how he came up with this awful twist, is as a way to try and piece it all together to make sense of it all. And it doesn't. But that was his attempt. And if you go back and watch the scene where the butler where Karloff's assistant explains to Jack Nicholson's character the true nature of the relationship between the old crone and Boris Karloff, it's done in close-ups only because they didn't have access to the set anymore. So that was like some of the last things they filmed. It was like the last touch-ups, the last callbacks for the actors to do anything. And that was basically to try to make it make sense. And it just doesn't. But that's how you end up with something like this. And I go, well, that makes perfect sense now. All of it, everything, all the problems make perfect sense.
God bless Roger Corman.
Oh, man. Oh, man. I did appreciate some of the stuff, especially like the cheesy special effects. Karloff is, even in this film, Karloff still in some scenes manages to portray something, to give something of himself. Yeah. And I think Jack Nicholson couldn't stand up to it at that point in his career. He just didn't have the experience yet to kind of just improvise the way Karloff was doing.
Well, that, and he's coming right off. I mean, Karloff could do this because he's got more, he's got more experience, but both of them are coming right off of The Raven.
I presume The Raven was actually a scripted film from beginning to end. I presume. I don't know, but I'm presuming it was. At least it had a feel.
It looked more scripted.
It looked more scripted. It felt more scripted. Every film has a wrap party for the cast, And
Yeah.
at the end of The Raven, when some of the studio chiefs were there, and they're looking around and they say, these sets should be gone by now. And they kind of figured he was doing something. But they also knew that because Corman didn't own the rights to use those sets, that it was the studio sets and there would be legal issues, he knew that Corman would have to come back to the studio, that whatever he was up to, whatever the finished product it was he was doing with this stuff, that they'd have to come back for distribution. And that's when that was happening. So you had American International Productions produce both of these films.
Wild.
It is a wild
stuff.
film that way. On its own, it's terrible. But knowing it now, all that stuff that goes into it, yeah, it's actually rather interesting. And next time I watch it, it's going to be with that, looking at it with that eye, trying to piece together. I wonder which director did this part. There's really not much more to say about the film itself because, like I said, there's not much film here to review. I think for me, at least, the movie's going to be more fun in hindsight. It was more fun in hindsight. On its own, it's dull and messy, kind of like a butter knife cutting a tomato. But imagining an absolute chaos is going on perimeter for this one, at least, it's worth a single viewing, possibly more if you're into B movies like me. I'm going to say this is bad dates, and if you're into B movies, it might be in a museum even. It depends, but it's somewhere in that range for me, and it's definitely got some moments of, Nuke the Fridge in there as well. Just kind of like really bad B-movie stuff. There's some scenes that just kind of end, before they should. There's one at least where just, where Carla finishes a line, you expect to see, Jack Nicholson's response, and is just not there. Just fade to black and move on.
Does he ever get his horse back?
I don't know. He cared about it briefly, didn't he?
Yeah, I gotta go feed my horse. Your horse is gone. Oh, shucks.
Oh man, and he got really upset about that too. He would not believe that the actual literal true thing that happened, that the horse bolted. It's not an absurd thing to think during a thunderstorm that the horse would bolt, and you might lose your horse that way. But no, he wasn't taking it. That was a bridge too far for him. That's suspicious. But yeah, it's pretty much a bad dates or in a museum if you're really into the B movie stuff and like the idea of thinking about, as the movie's going, all this extra stuff, this behind the scenes stuff that's going on. Yeah, that's where I'm at with this.
I am all the way in the category of Nuke the Fridge.
Nuke the Fridge.
You should 100% watch this movie for the fun time it is. Just every little thing. But fun fact, the woman, Elaine, is that her name? Was that the character's name?
Yeah, Elaine or Ilsa. They change it up depending.
Yeah.
I think she's supposed to be possessed. She's not the actual girl. I don't know. The way they do it is again.
She discomposes. But anyways,
it's her.
That was his wife, Jack Nicholson's wife. They weren't married for a long time, but
mother of his first child too.
Go watch this movie if you can. Watch it. If there's any kind of riff tracks for it, definitely watch the riff tracks.
Fun fact, Marian, do you remember there's a game called Doorways to Adventure?
No, but it sounds familiar.
It's probably a little bit before your time. I'm a Gen X guy from back in the 80s, and they had these VHS games, your video. Basically, you would fast forward to a certain color screen, and that would be your next kind of adventure, and it would take clips from old movies, usually adventure films and whatnot. But this is one of the films. The Terror, I didn't know it back then, that they actually took scenes from The Terror to involve as a clip from Doorways to Adventure as the setup for the game's adventure for that round.
I'm so on board with this.
Yes. It was one of those games that game actually, I credit that game in part for getting me into terrible B movies, just because it was so much fun. It was fun to play while watching clips from bad B movies. Later accelerated with things like Mystery Science Theater, of course. But back then, yeah, it's like, and I remember some of those clips, and this was, I was like, I know this movie. Anyway, as a fun little side note, folks, if you guys have ever played Doorways to Adventure, or if you know of the game of Doorways to Adventure, if you're one of those people, leave a comment below. I'd like to see if anyone else remembers it. Well, at this time, folks, we'd like to remind you guys out there that if you're enjoying our shared journey through movie history, please do like, subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Maybe you'll get to see a lot more of these cheesy movies, just like the one we saw this week. But anyway, I think that's our take for this week. It's a short one this week, but next week is Please Don't Eat the Daisies. It's a 1960 comedy starring Doris Day and David Niven. Any other last words for people, especially considering what we just watched?
I am Justin, but I'm really Ryan. And you are Justin, but you're really Ryan, but you're really Justin. and we're all Jack Nicholson.
And we're all Jack Nicholson. In the end, isn't that true of all of us? We're all a little bit of Jack Nicholson. No, we're not.
Go watch The Terror. Go have a good time.
Go watch The Terror. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, folks.